Hi everyone, my name is Dr. Scott Schell and I'm a specialist in the Germanic languages. I have a bachelor's degree in German, a master's degree in linguistics, and a PhD in Germanic linguistics from UC Berkeley. And today what I would like to do is go ahead and discuss with you the differences between Old High German and Old Saxon. So first of all, Old High German was not a unified language. From what I've seen on the internet, a lot of people sort of try to discuss Old High German as if like every single dialect of Old High German went through the same shifts. That's actually not the case. We have many different dialects of Old High German. We have, for example, East Franconian, Rhenish Franconian, Bavarian, Alemannic, Middle Franconian. We even have the Switzerland area is also considered the Old High German dialect area, as well as even parts of like Tyrol. And depending on where we are talking about, basically some of these regions went through certain shifts and some of the other regions didn't. So the very first sound that I want to go ahead and talk about, which, you know, everyone talks about this as a sort of Old High German shift, is eth. So proto-Germanic eth actually becomes a D in the West Germanic languages. However, in Old High German, that D shifts to a T. And so that's why, for example, in Old Saxon we have Vater, but in Old High German we have Vater. However, that D is still retained in Rhenish Franconian. So if you look at the singular form for the word God in its genitive case, you'll see, for example, that it's G-O-D-E-S, and it looks suspiciously like Old Saxon. But if you go further south, you'll see that that D ends up devoicing to a T. Now, the second shift that I want to talk about is barred B. So in Proto-Germanic, barred B was actually a bilabial voiced fricative. This is similar to like Spanish vamos, so not like vamos or vamos, but, you know, right in the middle there, vamos. Now, this barred B actually remained arguably in Old Saxon. However, it became a stop in Old High German. And so, for example, while we have something like Jevan in Old Saxon, we have geben in Old High German. And in fact, if you go further south again, towards Bavaria, you'll see that it devoices from a B to a P, and that's how we have, for example, hoppen, as opposed to East Franconian and even modern German, haben. And then we have the voiced velar fricative g, as we see in Proto-Germanic. This is actually retained in Dutch, so for you Dutch speakers out there, or those of you who know Dutch, you also are aware, of course, that that initial G sound is not like g as in gaan, but closer to something like g, right? So we have that voiced velar fricative there. In all Germanic languages, this actually hardens to a G, except for, of course, in Dutch. So in Old Saxon, you'll see it in the word like Jevan, Old High German, geben. But again, if you go down to like the Bavarian area, you'll see that that devoices again. So instead of having the word for God spelled as like G-O-D or G-O-T, you'll see that it's Gott. So it's literally C-O-T or K-O-T. Either way, it has that same sort of phonological quality to it. Another example is for the medial G. You'll see like you'll have German, or I should say East Franconian or standard Old High German as like Vogel, but if you go down further south to Bavaria, you'll see Vogel. And so in which case that G is then devoiced to a C sound, if you will. And so as you can tell, basically the further south we go, the more all of those Old High German shifts occur. So P, T, and K are probably the most discussed Old High German consonant shifts, and in which case P remains P in the West Germanic dialects or languages, but it shifts to PF in Old High German. So for example, we have pound, but we have Pfund in actually most of the Old High German dialects, because that P does not shift in Middle Franconian. So again, you know, we're dealing with this gradability. The further south you go, the more likely you are to see that shift. Another one is T. This does remain T in the West Germanic languages. However, in Old High German, it does go to that TS sound, and it's spelled with a Z. Zahn, for example, that is tooth in English. The word for tooth in Old Saxon is Tant, but in Old High German, you'll see it shift to Zahn. K is another one where it's all actually K, I guess, for the most part, in all the Germanic languages. But in the Swiss dialect of Old High German, that K actually is Ch, so it's actually more like an Ach laut. So an example here, Old Saxon Korn, so corn. Old High German, your typical Old High German is Korn. But the further south you go, getting into the Swiss territories, it's more like Horn. So you kind of have that Ach laut sort of sound to it. Medial P, medial T, and medial K. Medial P stays as medial P in Old Saxon, so for example, that's why you have slapen. However, Old High German has slafen, so basically medial P completely shifts to that F. T also, of course, has the same sort of shift as we see in Old Saxon. We have etan, for example, but in Old High German, that medial T is going to shift to that double Z, and that's how we get essen. Now, as you can see, that's actually even the essen is also, of course, the modern German pronunciation of that. Medial K is actually unchanged for the most part, unless, of course, we're talking about Old High German. So, for example, make with that K there, or Old Saxon machen with that K there, shifts to basically a double H machen sound in Old High German. As you see there, it's spelled with the literal two H's there. Sometimes you'll actually see it spelled with like a CH and then an HH. You know, again, it's all gradable. So basically, again, the further south you go, the more likely you are to encounter these sound shifts. One of the most salient features too is proto-Germanic long O. So proto-Germanic long O remains long O in Old Saxon, but it becomes a diphthong in Old High German. So for example, you have Bolk in Old Saxon, but you have Buch in Old High German. Furthermore, if you go down to Bavaria, that B devoices to a P, and you have Puch. So you have a couple different sound shifts going on there, as you can see. So this is also why, for instance, if I talk to you about the Halion and I say, hey, there is this word there in its book and it's spelled B-O-K, that's kind of the expected form that we would see for Old Saxon. But if I say, oh, well, this spelling is B-U-O-K or B-U-O-H, I would say, well, that's Old High German interference or influence, and you know, that's where I'm coming from with all of this. And then we finally have the nasal spirant law. Basically, this is just a nasal. In this case, it's going to be an N plus a spirant. So in this example, it's going to be an S. So essentially what happens is that in all of the languages, all of the Germanic languages, except for Old High German and Gothic, that N disappears. That's actually why we have us in English, literally US, but we have uns in German because you have the nasal there plus the spirant, but again, that's retained in German. It's not retained in English. It's also not retained in Old Norse. And so that's another feature to look out for because let's say, for example, I'm dealing with an Old Saxon personal name and I see that it's recorded A-S-G-E-R. That would be like Osjer, meaning God-spear. But let's say I see a name that's recorded in an Old Saxon speaking area, but it's actually A-N-S-G-E-R, so it's Ansjer. Well, because of the nasal spirant law, since I see a nasal plus an S there, I would say this is an Old High German form. It's not Old Saxon. And then we have one more thing that we're going to talk about here, and that is W disappearing before a consonant. And so, for example, we'll have Risilik in Old Saxon. You see that W plus that R there, but in Old High German, as you see here, it does disappear. So that's pretty much all I wanted to go ahead and talk about today. I just wanted to give you all a very, very basic understanding when it comes to just differentiating between Old High German and Old Saxon. I also wanted to kind of make you all aware that there is no unified Old High German. as academics, when we talk about Old High German, we already know that what we're actually referring to in a general sense is East Franconian. So, you know, but we already know basically we're talking about like the Fulda area, but we want to get a little more technical here, right? We want to talk about Old High German, but, you know, we want to go ahead and pinpoint and identify different dialects too. And the reason why we want to do that, for example, is because with this channel I'm going to be talking about the Hildebrandslied, I'm going to be talking about the Merseburg charms, I'm going to be talking about Muspelli, and those all belong to different dialects, and I don't want to just give it the old blanket, oh, this is Old High German, because, you know, it's Old High German. But I want you all to understand that when I'm talking about these things, it's like, oh, this is actually a Bavarian text, and this is why it's Bavarian, and so on and so forth. So hopefully I didn't lose you guys. Hopefully you got most, if not all, of what I was saying. And yeah, go ahead, like the video, subscribe, let everyone know, of course, that, you know, I'm going to be talking about more Old High German material here on my channel. And so, you know, tell them to stay tuned for the next video or two.